On June 25, 2025, Sotheby's will auction off the messiest Birkin bag on earth. No diamonds, no platinum, not even both handles intact. Just one string-held flap, covered in scribbles, stickers, and decades of wear. And yet, insiders expect it to shatter the $450,000 record once set by the Diamond Himalaya Birkin. Why? Because this isn't just any Birkin. This was Jane Birkin's Birkin, the prototype, the original, held together, literally, by thread. The woman who inspired the world's ultimate status symbol couldn't have cared less about status. While celebrities now store pristine Birkins in temperature-controlled vaults, Jane preferred a 5-franc wicker basket and a wrinkled t-shirt. She was the anti-influencer before the word existed. A woman who once stood on a bridge in Paris, asking whether the Seine would be kinder than fame. So, how did she end up as the face of effortless chic and the accidental godmother of a billion-dollar industry? To understand why this broken bag might become the most expensive ever sold, you have to start at the beginning. On the night Jane Birkin nearly gave up and accidentally rewrote fashion history. Because if you think you know the woman behind the Birkin, wait until you meet the one who never wanted it. Jane Birkin was born into the kind of family people romanticize on paper. London, 1946. Her father, David, was an actual war hero, an intelligence officer who cracked enemy codes in the Royal Navy. Her mother, Judy Campbell, was one of the most famous stage actresses in Britain, Noel Coward's Muse, and a legend of the West End. By all appearances, Jane was destined to be exceptional, but she felt like a mistake in a world of perfect performances. She was tall, awkward, painfully shy. She called her teeth rabbit teeth and hated her wide mouth. At school, she was mocked for being flat-chested. The girls whispered, half boy, half girl. She hid behind her fringe, cut it herself, and hoped no one would notice her. At her strict Catholic boarding school in England, the nuns tried to smooth her out, polish her into something refined. While her mother dazzled on stage and at soirée, Jane was the girl in the shadows, silent, scribbling in notebooks, wondering why she didn't fit into any of it. She was 17 when she landed her first acting role, mostly by accident. She forgot her lines at the audition, panicked, froze. But instead of walking out, the casting director said, "You'll play a deaf-mute girl." No lines, just presence. That moment, the rejection of polish, the acceptance of awkwardness, planted the seed of something. Maybe her difference was the point. But it didn't feel like freedom yet. At 18, she married composer John Barry. Yes, the man who wrote the James Bond theme. On paper, it looked like a victory. The spy's daughter marries the sound of spy movies. But the fantasy unraveled quickly. Barry was cold and controlling. Jane felt small again, unseen in her own home, just as she had at school. There were rumors of Barry's infidelity. At age 19, she gave birth to a daughter, Kate, and still felt like she was failing at being a woman. At 22, exhausted, invisible, and barely speaking a word of French, she boarded a plane with her toddler and flew to Paris. No map, no plan. She had enough of her life as it was. But sometimes the best decisions are the ones that terrify you. And Paris was about to teach Jane that not belonging everywhere might be exactly what gave her new life so much sense. Paris in 1968 was electric with revolution. Students were building barricades, culture was exploding, everything felt possible. Into this chaos walked Jane Birkin, cast almost by accident in a film called Slogan. She nearly got fired because the crew thought she was too English. Then she met Serge Gainsbourg on set. He was 40 to her 21, already famous for writing provocative songs for Brigitte Bardot. Jane's first impression? He was rude and cold. I thought he hated me. But Serge saw something in Jane that she'd never seen in herself. While she saw awkwardness, he saw revolutionary authenticity. While she saw flaws, he saw a new kind of beauty that could change everything. They couldn't communicate well in words. Her French was terrible, his English wasn't much better. But they understood each other emotionally. Their relationship exploded into passion almost immediately. Jane later said, "He was the love of my life. No one loved me like he did." Serge wrote roles and songs specifically for Jane, seeing her not as a muse to be used, but as an artist to be unleashed. And then came the moment that would change both their lives forever. Serge had written Je t'aime moi non plus, originally for Brigitte Bardot. But when Bardot backed out, he asked Jane to record it. 4 minutes of breathy moans and erotic tension that would scandalize the world. But here's what's remarkable. Jane was so shy she could barely order food in French, yet she agreed to record the most sexually explicit song of the decade. What gave her the courage? Love, desperation, or something else entirely? In February 1969, Je t'aime, moi non plus sent Europe into absolute chaos.
Je vais et je viens.
The song builds from whispered French to what sounds unmistakably like a woman reaching climax. Jane's moans and breathless Je t'aime, oh oui, je t'aime, had the entire world convinced they were listening to a very private moment. The BBC banned it within hours. The Vatican condemned it. Italy seized thousands of copies. Radio stations across Europe pulled it. That only made it more desirable. By March, it had reached #1 in the UK, the first banned song ever to do so. But here's the controversy that's raged for decades. Was Jane actually simulating an orgasm, or were those sounds genuine? Jane gave conflicting accounts over the years. Serge, delighted by the uproar, never clarified. The song is what you hear. Everything else is between us. What do you think? After watching this video, go listen to it and tell us in the comments. By today's standards, does it still shock? Or has our culture moved so far that what scandalized 1969 now seems quaint? For shy Jane, the success felt like a nightmare. She was suddenly famous not for her talent, but for the sound of her breathing. Paparazzi shouted questions about whether the orgasm was real. She felt exposed, violated, turned inside out for entertainment. Away from the spotlight, Jane wasn't just struggling, she was unraveling. The woman who sounded confident on record was scratching her legs with eggshells in private, desperate to feel something real in a world that had turned her most intimate moments into entertainment. But here's the paradox. The more she wanted to hide, the more the world wanted to see her. Jane became a fashion icon by completely ignoring fashion. While other women studied Vogue, Jane was just trying to get dressed without performing femininity for anyone's approval. She wore men's white shirts because they were comfortable. She went braless because bras felt restrictive, revolutionary in an era when structured undergarments were mandatory. She carried wicker baskets because handbags seemed pretentious. Jane was closely associated with Yves Saint Laurent, particularly during the 1960s and 1970s. She often wore their designs, such as sheer dresses and taffeta gowns, which complemented her free-spirited style. Fashion photographers couldn't get enough of her. She appeared in editorial shoots for magazines like Vogue and Elle. Here was a woman who looked effortlessly chic without trying, naturally sexy without posing, authentically cool without calculating every move. The moment that cemented her legend happened at Cannes in 1974. Jane wore a sheer crochet dress with no bra. Not to shock anyone, she just liked the dress. When camera flashes went off, it became completely transparent. The paparazzi went insane. The photos became iconic overnight. Jane's reaction? I didn't realize you could see through it until the photos came out. I was mortified. But that mortification, that genuine surprise, was exactly what made it powerful. Jane wasn't performing sexuality. She was just being herself. And herself happened to be revolutionary. Suddenly, women everywhere were copying the Jane Birkin look. What we now call skinimalism, the no-makeup, effortless beauty trend, Jane was doing 50 years ago. She was the original clean girl aesthetic, proving that authenticity is magnetic. Jane was baffled by the phenomenon. She later said, "I never understood why people wanted to copy me. I was just wearing what felt comfortable. I wasn't trying to make statements. I was just trying to survive." And that's exactly why it worked. Behind the glamorous photos, Jane's relationship with Serge was slowly destroying her soul. What looked like passionate romance was psychological warfare. Serge's drinking was getting worse. When he drank, most evenings, he became cruel, jealous, unpredictable. Jane became an expert at reading his moods, managing his emotions, disappearing when necessary. She was turning herself into whatever he needed, losing more of herself each day. Picture Jane at 3 a.m., watching Serge passed out drunk on their sofa, empty bottles scattered like evidence of another night she'd tried to love someone back to life. She was 24 and felt ancient, dying inside. This is when her mental health collapsed. The self-harm escalated. She was having panic attacks, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. She felt like she was disappearing, not just from Serge, but from herself. And that brings us back to the beginning of this story, to 1970. Jane standing on the Pont Neuf Bridge at 3 a.m. staring at the black water. The most famous song in Europe had her voice on it, but she could barely recognize herself anymore. But she didn't jump. Something stopped her. Maybe her daughter Kate, maybe stubborn English determination, maybe just knowing that Serge's version of love wasn't the only love possible. Shortly after, Jane was hospitalized for severe depression for 5 months. But in that hospital, away from everything, Jane started remembering who she'd been before the world decided who she should be. When Jane emerged from the hospital, something fundamental had shifted. She was still with Serge, still playing his Muse, but there was new strength underneath, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. She started saying no for the first time. She began choosing her own projects. She started setting boundaries with Serge, even though it led to bigger fights. By the late 1970s, their relationship was more war than love. In 1980, Jane did something that shocked everyone. She left Serge Gainsbourg. Not because she stopped loving him, she never did, but because she finally understood that love shouldn't feel like drowning. Leaving Serge wasn't about stopping love, it was about starting to love myself enough to survive, she later said. She was also a mother to 3 daughters, Kate from her first marriage, Charlotte with Serge, and later Lou with director Jacques Doyon. Each child represented a different version of herself, a different attempt at getting love right. Instead of breaking Jane, leaving Serge made her stronger. For the first time in years, she could breathe without calculating someone else's mood first. And that's when the universe decided to play one of the biggest jokes on the fashion industry. It's 1981, and Jane is on a routine Air France flight from Paris to London with baby Lou and her signature disaster of a basket bag. Picture this wicker catastrophe: baby bottles, diapers, scripts, makeup, books, probably a half-eaten croissant. It's held together by hope and string. As Jane tries to stuff this into the overhead bin, baby bottles roll down the aisle. Papers scatter like confetti. Other passengers dodge flying objects. Sitting next to her is Jean-Louis Dumas, CEO of Hermès. Instead of being annoyed, he's fascinated by this effortlessly chic woman whose life is literally falling apart in front of him. As Jane scrambles to collect her belongings, she turns to the stranger and says, "God, I can never find a bag that's both stylish and actually functional. Everything's either too small for real life or too stiff to actually live out of." Right there, at 30,000 feet, Dumas has an epiphany. He grabs whatever paper he can find and starts sketching. The universe has a sense of humor. The woman who couldn't organize her life accidentally organized a luxury revolution. That sketch became the Birkin bag, the world's most exclusive handbag, inspired by Jane's complete inability to keep her life organized. When Hermès presented Jane with the first Birkin in 1984, she was touched but bewildered. The deal she made was pure Jane. Instead of royalties, they had to make annual donations to charities of her choice. Classic Jane, turning personal fame into help for others. Jane gets this beautiful, handcrafted leather masterpiece, and what does she do? She uses it. Really, truly, chaotically uses it. Within months, that poor bag was carrying everything: scripts, baby bottles, makeup, books, probably some fruit that went bad. Jane treated it exactly like the wicker basket it replaced. The leather started to wear. The corners got scuffed. The handles stretched from being overstuffed. Any normal person would have been horrified. Jane thought it was getting character. Then she let her daughters draw on it. Stickers appeared, travel tags accumulated. She tied charms to it with string when hardware broke. She doodled on it during boring meetings. Over the decades, that first Birkin became art through destruction. One handle broke and was held together with kitchen string. The leather looked ancient. It was covered in the beautiful detritus of a life fully lived. When fashion critics gasped at her bag's condition, Jane's response was pure authenticity. "I don't understand why people want perfect things. Perfect things have no stories. This bag has lived. Isn't that more beautiful?" In 2010, Jane auctioned off that destroyed Birkin for charity. Fashion experts predicted maybe $20,000 because of its terrible condition. It sold for $162,500. That's the Jane Birkin effect. The more she ignored luxury, the more valuable her authenticity became. Kate Barry, Jane's eldest daughter, had become a renowned fashion photographer, creating art that was both commercial and deeply personal. She'd inherited Jane's ability to see through surface glamour to the real person underneath. But Kate had also inherited the family's struggles with mental health and addiction. The cruelest irony? Kate inherited Jane's artistic eye and her pain in equal measure. The same sensitivity that made her see beauty everywhere also made the world feel unbearably intense. On December 11, 2013, Kate fell from the fourth-floor window of her Paris apartment. She was 46. The official ruling was suicide. Jane was destroyed in a way that made all her previous struggles seem manageable. The woman who had survived toxic relationships, industry exploitation, and mental breakdowns was brought to her knees by the loss every parent fears most. She largely disappeared from public view. When photographers caught glimpses of her, the grief was visible in every line of her face. She said in one interview, "There is no word in any language for a mother who loses her child." But even in her deepest grief, Jane never stopped being fundamentally Jane. Even while drowning in grief, Jane continued showing up for causes that mattered. AIDS research, human rights work with Amnesty International, refugee assistance. She used whatever energy she had left to help others survive their own struggles. Her relationship with Charlotte and Lou became even more precious. Charlotte, now a successful actress and singer, and Lou, a model and musician, became Jane's anchors in an unstable world. Jane continued aging in public without apology, something almost unheard of for women in fashion. While other icons disappeared or went under the knife, Jane just continued being herself. Gray hair, laugh lines, and lived-in beauty. She lived simply in a modest left bank apartment, surrounded by books, photos of her daughters, and accumulated beauty from decades of authentic living rather than careful curation. In 2021, she suffered a mild stroke and kept an even lower profile. But those who saw her around Paris said she remained unmistakably herself, just quieter, more reflective. Here's where Jane's story gets surreal. While she lived simply and gave handbags away, the luxury world built an empire around her name, representing everything she never cared about. Today, a basic Birkin starts at $10,000 and can reach $300,000 for rare versions. The most expensive ever created, Ginza Tanaka's Diamond Birkin, was worth $1.9 million, platinum encrusted with over 2,000 diamonds. But it's the celebrity obsession that would have truly baffled Jane. Cardi B owns over 30 Birkins, including custom-painted versions featuring portraits of her daughter. Kim Kardashian spray paints her $50,000-plus bags to match outfits, causing fashion purists to have meltdowns. Victoria Beckham has over 100 bags, treating them like coordinated accessories. Drake collects them for his future wife, turning bags into romantic gestures worth more than most people's cars. The most absurd part? Many celebrities never use their bags. They buy them at auction, have them authenticated, and immediately place them in secure storage while tracking their appreciation like stock portfolios. Investment firms now track Birkin prices like stock indices. Meanwhile, Jane used hers to carry groceries from the local market. The irony is breathtaking. Jane's anti-materialist philosophy accidentally created the ultimate materialist object. Her rejection of status symbols birthed one of the world's most coveted status symbol. Birkin's modeling was unconventional. She didn't walk runways or pose for extensive ad campaigns like modern supermodels. Instead, her public persona, street style, and appearances at events made her a muse for photographers and designers. Jane Birkin's real legacy extends far beyond fashion. But let's talk about how she's literally reshaping beauty standards on your phone right now. On TikTok, Gen Z influencers create Jane Birkin aesthetic content, spending hundreds on Birkin-inspired outfits while having no idea who she was. They're cosplaying authenticity, buying curated chaos, performing effortlessness. Jane, who became iconic by accident, is now a carefully calculated trend. But here's what's fascinating. Most of these influencers have no idea who Jane actually was. They're performing authenticity, buying curated chaos, turning her accidental style into calculated content. Jane, who became iconic by accident, is now a carefully manufactured trend. Alexa Chung has built her entire career on the Jane Birkin template, effortless hair, vintage pieces, that model off-duty look that Jane invented decades ago. Lily Rose Depp channels Jane's Parisian cool. Kaya Gerber has cited Jane as her style inspiration. Even Hailey Bieber's clean girl aesthetic, The slicked back hair, dewy skin, minimal makeup that broke the internet is pure Jane Birkin, 50 years later. The difference? Hailey's effortless look requires $200 skincare products and professional styling. Jane's required rolling out of bed. The Jane Birkin aesthetic has become a billion-dollar industry. Fashion brands sell Birkin-inspired baskets for $300. Influencers teach courses on how to look effortlessly chic like Jane Birkin. Jane embodied what modern feminism champions decades before it had a name, rejecting societal expectations about how women should look, act, and age. Her approach to activism was quintessentially Jane. She showed up, did the work, and never made it about her image. Jane proved that vulnerability could be strength decades before Brené Brown made it mainstream. She talked openly about mental health struggles when it was career suicide, admitted her mistakes as a mother when perfection was expected, and showed her authentic self when everyone else was performing curated versions of femininity. Today's body positivity movement, the clean girl aesthetic, and rejection of traditional beauty standards all trace back to Jane's unconscious revolution. Jane's most important legacy lives through her daughters. Charlotte Gainsbourg has become a respected actress and musician, working with directors like Lars von Trier. But more importantly, she's carried forward her mother's commitment to authenticity over image. In 2021, Charlotte released Jane by Charlotte, an intimate documentary that showed Jane not as a fashion icon, but as a mother, grandmother, and woman dealing with aging, loss, and life's complexity. Lou Doyon has followed a similar path, working as a model and musician while maintaining artistic integrity. She's appeared in major fashion campaigns but consistently chosen projects aligning with her values rather than just commercial success. Both daughters speak about Jane's influence not in terms of fame or fashion, but authenticity and resilience. Charlotte has said, "My mother taught me that being real is more important than being perfect. She showed me you can survive anything if you don't lose yourself." On July 16, 2023, Jane Birkin died peacefully in Paris at age 76. She had lived to see her accidental handbag become a billion-dollar industry, her effortless style copied by millions, and her authentic approach to life inspired generations of women to embrace imperfection. The fact that her name became synonymous with luxury and exclusivity would have made her laugh, if it didn't make her slightly sad. The woman who gave away designer bags, lived modestly, and always prioritized people over possessions became the ultimate symbol of conspicuous consumption. Her death prompted an outpouring of tributes, not just from fashion insiders, but from human rights organizations, AIDS charities, and countless women who saw in Jane permission to be authentically themselves. French President Emmanuel Macron called her a complete artist, a free woman. But Jane's real legacy isn't about handbags or fashion trends. It's about the radical act of being yourself in a world that profits from your insecurity. She changed how we think about beauty, success, and what it means to live well. Jane Birkin never set out to change the world. She just refused to let the world change her core self. And maybe that's the most powerful revolution of all. Not the dramatic overthrow of systems, but the quiet insistence on being authentic, real in a culture that rewards performance, and human in an industry that prefers symbols. I only had one thing going for me. I looked like I didn't belong, and maybe that's what made me belong everywhere. That's the real Jane Birkin legacy. Not a handbag, but a way of being. Not perfection, but authenticity. Not status, but substance. It's the most valuable thing Jane Birkin ever owned. And she spent her entire life giving it away for free. The woman who accidentally inspired the world's most expensive handbag by spilling her life across an airplane floor taught us that the most precious things can't be contained, organized, or sold. They can only be lived. What's one way you could be more authentically yourself today? Jane's story deserves to inspire more than just handbag purchases. It deserves to inspire lives lived without apology. So if this story moved you, share it. Send it to someone who needs a reminder that they don't have to be perfect to be powerful. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more true stories of iconic lives that didn't follow the rules, because sometimes the messiest lives leave the clearest mark.